Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to explore 20 secret documents that the Vatican tried to erase, all related to Pope Francis. Shocking information that could completely change the way you view the current Pope. If you've heard about any of these documents before, leave a 1 in the comments. If this is your first time hearing about them, leave a 0. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our exciting future content. Now, let's dive into the journey of uncovering these hidden secrets. After the death of Pope Francis, the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, the world was engulfed in mourning. Santo Francesco. In this context, the Vatican was allowed to clean house and remove records that could tarnish the image of the Church and the Vatican, such as blessings for same-sex couples, a pope or judge accepting a blasphemous crucifix, or even statements denying the existence of hell. In 2013, Pope Francis was elected and took over a church that was mired in crisis due to decades-long abuse scandals. Pope Benedict XVI handed him a large white box filled with detailed documents about the abuse cases and other scandals. To address this issue in 2014, Pope Francis established the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. However, in 2017, Marie Collins, a member of the commission and also a survivor of clerical abuse, resigned. She stated that her resignation was due to frustration with the lack of cooperation from Vatican officials in addressing these critical issues. The gravest mistake of Pope Francis occurred during his 2018 visit to Chile, when he dismissed the allegations against Bishop Juan Barros as slander, which deeply angered and hurt the victims of sexual abuse. Despite receiving a 2,300-page report confirming the allegations, Pope Francis did not fully grasp the severity of the issue at the time. However, after strong backlash from the public and the victims, he acknowledged his serious errors and accepted the resignation of several Chilean bishops involved. This incident remains a dark point in his legacy. And while Pope Francis has made significant efforts to address the issue of sexual abuse within the Church, these scandals remain an indelible stain on his journey. They not only reflect flaws in handling sexual abuse cases, but also serve as a reminder of the necessity for reform within the Church to protect the rights of the victims who have been harmed. Pope Francis has repeatedly shown sincerity when meeting with victims, expressing deep sorrow and determination to implement the necessary reforms. However, for many critics, especially the victims, they feel that his words have not been translated into concrete actions, leaving many to feel that these commitments lack the decisiveness needed in policy enforcement. Another controversial case involves Mauro Inzoli, where Pope Francis reversed Pope Benedict XVI's 2014 decision to remove Inzoli's clerical status, later opting for a permanent dismissal. Inzoli, who had been convicted in a civil court, sparked significant criticism for the delays and lack of resoluteness in addressing offenders within the Church. One of the most controversial sources during Pope Francis's papacy is his stance on divorce, particularly expressed in the 2016 apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia, the Joy of Love, a pastoral document on marriage and family life. Few documents under his papacy have sparked as much theological debate. The focus of the controversy lies in footnote 351, which suggests that, in certain circumstances, Catholics who are divorced and civilly remarried might be permitted to receive the Eucharist. This is seen as a groundbreaking relaxation of the Church's traditional doctrinal stance, which has long considered such actions a barrier to receiving the sacraments. For supporters, it represents mercy and a more pastoral approach that is closer to the realities of the faithful's lives. However, for conservatives, it is seen as a dangerous ambiguity that threatens the consistency and immutability of Catholic doctrine. Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis's 2016 apostolic exhortation on marriage and family, sparked deep controversy by suggesting that Catholics who are divorced and remarried civilly could be allowed to receive communion in certain circumstances. The document was the result of two synods of bishops, 2014-2015, which saw significant disagreements between conservative and progressive bishops. The reaction within the Church was deeply divided. 4 prominent cardinals submitted a dubia, 5 questions seeking clarification, but Francis chose not to respond directly, further fueling theological debate. The dispute grew more intense in 2017 when 62 Catholic scholars issued a correction accusing Francis of promoting 7 heretical propositions. For traditionalists, the concern was not only about communion for the divorced, but also about the integrity of Catholic doctrine. They argued that Amoris Laetitia contradicted sacred laws regarding adultery. Supporters, on the other hand, maintained that the document aligned with the Church's tradition of mercy and pastoral discernment. In his 2025 autobiography, Hope, Pope Francis defended his approach as a call to accompany people in complex situations. Next is Pope Francis's stance on same-sex unions. In December 2023, Pope Francis approved petitions for fiducia, a trust prayer that allows priests to offer pastoral blessings for same-sex couples and others in exceptional circumstances, as long as these blessings are not the same as marriage ceremonies or affirm the relationships themselves. This marks a significant shift, as just 2 years earlier, the Vatican had declared that God cannot bless sin. The controversy escalated after more than 100 Catholic scholars and clergy signed an open letter calling on church leaders to ask Pope Francis to withdraw the Fiducia Supplicans document. In response, Pope Francis firmly defended his decision, criticizing the opponents as hypocrites, willing to bless exploitative businessmen or individuals living contrary to the spirit of the gospel, yet opposing blessings for LGBTQ individuals seeking God with goodwill. Since his famous 2013 statement, "If someone is gay and seeks God and has goodwill, who am I to judge?" Pope Francis has maintained a more open and compassionate pastoral stance than his predecessors. While not altering the doctrine on marriage, he has repeatedly emphasized inclusivity, accompaniment, and respect for human dignity, especially for those often marginalized by society. Pope Francis's views on homosexuality and salvation have sparked significant debate within the Church. Additionally, his stance on religious pluralism has also been a point of controversy. In a 2024 interfaith meeting in Singapore, Pope Francis stated, "All religions are paths to God. They are like different languages, different expressions leading to the same truth." This statement triggered intense theological debate, with some critics arguing that it contradicts the traditional Catholic doctrine, which asserts that Jesus Christ is the only path to salvation. The controversy intensified when the Vatican's English translation was released, which softened Pope Francis's statements, suggesting that other religions are attempting to approach God rather than affirming them as true paths to Him. This is not the first time Pope Francis's interfaith statements have drawn attention. In 2019, he and Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayeb signed a document declaring that the diversity of religions is part of God's will in his infinite wisdom. This phrase left many Catholic theologians puzzled, as they feared it might imply that God desires religious pluralism to become a reality. The controversy over idol worship and the Pachamama statues became a hot topic during the Amazon Synod in 2019, when wooden statues identified as Pachamama, an indigenous fertility goddess, were displayed in a ceremony at the Vatican. Conservative Catholics criticized Pope Francis, accusing him of supporting the worship of pagan idols. The controversy escalated further when these statues were stolen from a church in Rome and thrown into the Tiber River, heightening tensions and drawing widespread attention. In addition to the religious controversies, Pope Francis's stance on economic and political issues has also attracted significant attention. He made a notable impact through his outspoken involvement in political and economic matters, garnering both admiration and criticism. His 2015 encyclical Laudato Si criticized global capitalism and called for urgent action on climate change, provoking strong reactions from conservatives who questioned whether advocating for such policies was within the Pope's authority. The criticisms were intensified by his harsh remarks on unrestrained capitalism and frequent condemnations of the worship of money, which led some to associate him with economic views leaning towards laziness. This perception was reinforced when he accepted a crucifix shaped like a hammer and sickle from Bolivia's President Evo Morales in 2015, sparking accusations of sympathy for Marxism. Immigration is another area where Pope Francis has expressed clear and strong views. His support for migrants has become one of the key pillars of his papacy, starting with his visit to Lampedusa in 2013 when he left Rome for the first time. In 2014, he criticized U.S. presidential candidates for their anti-life policies related to immigration and abortion. These comments were understood as political interference in key issues of U.S. politics, including abortion and contraception. Pope Francis has upheld the Church's traditional stance while also introducing more flexible adjustments. He has repeatedly condemned abortion as a grave moral sin, yet he extended the authority to forgive this sin to all priests, allowing them to offer absolution for abortion. Beyond this pragmatic approach, Pope Francis has also voiced criticism of traditional Latin masses, expressing the view that they do not fully meet the needs of the Church in today's era. In July 2021, Pope Francis issued a controversial decree that strictly limited the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass prior to Vatican II, effectively reversing the relaxations introduced by Pope Benedict XVI in the 2007 Summorum Pontificum. This decision sparked one of the most emotionally charged debates of Pope Francis's papacy, prompting a strong backlash from defenders of tradition. The traditional Latin Mass, celebrated in Latin with the priest facing the altar, has become a symbol for traditionalist Catholics who find in it a profound theological and cultural heritage. Pope Benedict XVI's Summorum Pontificum decree granted priests the freedom to celebrate this Mass without needing special permission from their bishops, viewing it as a unique expression of Roman authority aimed at preserving and maintaining the richness of the ancient rite. Pope Francis significantly reversed this approach by declaring that the post-Vatican II liturgy is the unique expression of the lex orandi of the Roman Rite, and requiring priests to obtain explicit permission from their bishops to celebrate the traditional form of the Mass. His decree also stipulated that traditional Latin Masses are not to be held in parish churches, effectively marginalizing them and reflecting the Church's preference for the modern liturgy and the communal nature of the rite. The response from traditionalist Catholics was one of deep pain and disappointment. Cardinals Raymond Leo Burke and Joseph Zen criticized the restrictions as unnecessary and harsh, arguing that they hurt the faithful who are devoted to the pre-Vatican II rite. Bishop Joseph Strickland emerged as one of the most outspoken critics, and ultimately his opposition led to Pope Francis removing him from office in 2023. The situation reached a peak in November 2023, when Pope Francis formally dismissed Strickland from his diocese, a rare move that underscored papal authority and highlighted growing tensions within the Church. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano went even further, calling for Pope Francis to resign in a controversial letter back in 2018. Pope Francis has cultivated a spontaneous, informal style of communication, in contrast to the more measured approach of his predecessors. While this authenticity has endeared him to many, his tendency to speak off the cuff has at times led to controversy. One of the most damaging incidents occurred in May 2024, when Francis was reported to have used a homophobic slur during a closed-door meeting with Italian bishops. The Vatican did not deny the remark, but issued an apology on behalf of the Pope. The incident damaged his credibility among those who had praised his seemingly more inclusive approach to LGBTQ+ issues. Francis's remarks about women have also sparked controversy. Although he has called for greater roles for women in the Church, his language at times reflects traditional gender norms. In his 2025 memoir, Hope, he emphasized that the Church belongs to women, yet upheld traditional restrictions on the priesthood, disappointing those who had hoped for more significant change. His comparison of gender theory to nuclear war, suggesting both are similarly destructive forces, alienated many transgender Catholics and their allies. This rhetoric stood in stark contrast to his more compassionate personal interactions with transgender individuals, including his 2015 meeting with Diego Neria Lejaraga. Other incidents, such as being filmed pulling his hand away from pilgrims attempting to kiss his ring, a gesture some traditionalists saw as a rejection of papal reverence, have further fueled criticism. The Pope has also been a figure of controversy due to allegations related to war crimes. Long before he became Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio's actions during Argentina's brutal Dirty War sparked debate. When he was elected Pope in 2013, these allegations resurfaced on the international stage. The most serious accusations concern Bergoglio's role as Jesuit provincial during the military dictatorship. Two Jesuit priests under his leadership, Orlando Yorio and Franz Jalitsch, were kidnapped by the Navy in 1976 and subjected to torture. After their release, Yorio accused Bergoglio of having effectively withdrawn the Jesuit order's protection from them, leaving them more vulnerable to government persecution. These allegations gained attention through reports by the pro-government newspaper Pagina.12, which portrayed Bergoglio as complicit in the actions of the military junta. A 2005 criminal complaint accused him of betraying the priests to the military authorities, though it was dismissed due to a lack of evidence. When Bergoglio was elected pope, several factors helped ease the controversy. Franz Jalic issued a statement clarifying that he had reconciled with Bergoglio and considered the matter resolved, stating that he had changed his position after realizing that Bergoglio had not denounced them to the military. Additionally, prominent human rights activists in Argentina, including Nobel Peace Prize laureate Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, came to Bergoglio's defense. Esquivel stated that while some bishops had been complicit with the Argentine dictatorship, Bergoglio was not among them. Pope Francis has made accusations of his own and has also sparked controversy over financial reform. When he became pope in 2013, he inherited a Vatican bureaucracy plagued by inefficiency, infighting, and financial misconduct. In December 2014, Francis delivered a scathing critique of the Roman Curia, listing 15 spiritual diseases afflicting the bureaucracy, an expression of his determination to change the institutional culture. That same year, he established the Secretariat for the Economy and appointed Cardinal George Pell as an external auditor to oversee financial reforms. Despite facing significant obstacles, Francis achieved some notable successes. The Institute for the Works of Religion underwent a major cleanup, with suspicious accounts closed and anti-money laundering protocols strengthened. However, new financial scandals emerged, most notably involving a London real estate investment made using funds from Peter's Pence. In response, Francis stripped the Secretariat of State of its financial assets, marking a significant shift in financial oversight and control. The pinnacle of Francis's structural reforms came in 2022 with Predicate Evangelium, a new apostolic constitution that reorganized the Roman Curia, placing a greater emphasis on the missionary focus and reducing the prominence of cardinals in favor of lay leadership. Critics argue that while Francis's reforms were well-intentioned, they have been inconsistent. They point out that despite his commitment to transparency, Francis inherited documents detailing financial misconduct from Benedict XVI, but has not always been forthcoming about their contents or the actions taken in response. Continuing from his institutional reforms, Pope Francis also turned to global issues that have caused theological and cultural tensions. One such controversy was the Pachamama debate. In October 2019, Pope Francis convened a synod of bishops for the Pan-Amazon region. While addressing important issues, the synod was overshadowed by a controversy that began when Pope Francis participated in a prayer session with indigenous people, where several wooden sculptures of pregnant women were displayed, which the indigenous participants identified as representations of Pachamama, or Mother Earth. The statues were later placed in the Santa Maria in Traspontina Church near the Vatican. For traditionalist Catholics, the presence of these statues in a Catholic church was deeply troubling. They viewed Pachamama as a pagan deity and believed that displaying such statues constituted idolatry, which is prohibited by the First Commandment. The situation escalated when a video surfaced showing two men dismantling several of the statues and throwing them into the Tiber River. The video depicted the two men entering a church near the Vatican just before dawn. One man approached the altars, picked up 5 statues, and carried them out of the church. They walked a short distance down the street to Castel Sant'Angelo, where they threw each statue off the bridge into the Tiber River. Francis responded by apologizing for referring to the statues as Pachamama, but clarified that they were displayed without any intention of idolatry. The video showed the two men entering a church near the Vatican just before dawn. One of them walked up to the altars, picked up 5 statues, and carried them out of the church. They then walked a short distance down the street to Castel Sant'Angelo, where they threw each statue off the bridge into the Tiber River. In his response, Pope Francis apologized for calling the statues Pachamama, but emphasized that they were displayed without any intent to worship idols. Next came Pope Francis's controversial actions toward China. In September 2018, the Vatican signed a temporary agreement with the Chinese government regarding the appointment of bishops. The main issue addressed was the appointment of bishops in China. Since the 1950s, the Catholic Church in China has been divided between the state-recognized Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association, which appoints bishops without Vatican approval, and an underground church loyal to Rome, which faces persecution. This agreement granted the Chinese government significant influence in selecting bishops, while giving the Pope the final approval. Supporters argued that the agreement represented a pragmatic step toward healing the division within Chinese Catholicism and improving conditions for Catholics in China. However, critics, most notably Cardinal Joseph Zen of Hong Kong, described it as a risk to destroy the true church in China. Zen claimed it betrayed the underground church, which had remained loyal despite persecution, and gave too much control to an atheistic government with a poor human rights record. These concerns were heightened by subsequent violations, including the unilateral appointment of Bishops John Penguiao and Joseph Shenbin in 2020 without proper consultation with the Vatican. Critics also pointed to the timing, which coincided with increasing religious repression in China, including the mass detention of Muslims and the intensification of surveillance on religious communities as diplomatic debates unfolded abroad. Francis has also faced increasing scrutiny over his stance on gender and the role of women in the Church. Throughout his papacy, Francis has encouraged more leadership roles for women while firmly maintaining traditional limits on the ordination of women. He has shown compassion for transgender individuals while strongly condemning gender theory. Regarding the role of women, Francis has appointed more women to positions at the Vatican than any previous pope, and has changed church law to officially allow women to serve as lectors and altar servers. However, he has repeatedly closed the door on the ordination of women. In his 2025 memoir, Hope, he emphasized that the Church belongs to women, but maintained traditional limits on the priesthood. This stance has disappointed supporters of women's ordination, who argue that his rhetoric on equality is inconsistent with maintaining the priesthood as exclusively male. They contend that his approach does not address the fundamental exclusion of women from sacramental and leadership roles. On transgender issues, Francis has shown personal compassion in individual cases, such as his 2015 meeting with transgender man Diego Neria Lejaraga, who reported feeling welcomed by the Pope. However, Francis has repeatedly condemned gender theory, once comparing it to nuclear weapons in terms of its destructive potential. These contradictions were further complicated by an incident in May 2024, when Francis was alleged to have used homophobic language in a private meeting with Italian bishops, damaging his reputation among those who view him as more open on LGBTQ+ issues. The review that Francis later authorized caused significant controversy. In April 2012, under Pope Benedict XVI, the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith issued an assessment of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, LCWR. The review criticized LCWR for positions that were seen as undermining church doctrine and appointed Archbishop Peter Sartain to oversee reforms. When Francis became pope in March 2013, many expected him to quickly reverse this decision, as he emphasized mercy and alignment with social justice priorities. However, in April 2013, Francis surprised observers by maintaining the reprimand, confirming that the investigation would continue under the direction of the CDF. This decision disappointed progressive Catholics who had hoped for an immediate change and raised questions about Francis's commitment to reforming the Church's approach to internal discipline. The controversy continued until April 2015, when the Vatican announced that the investigation had concluded earlier than expected. The final report had a conciliatory tone, acknowledging the valuable work of the nuns and avoiding harsh criticism. The resolution reflected Francis's more cautious approach, aligning with his emphasis on dialogue rather than disciplinary measures. The controversy highlighted the tensions within the U.S. Catholic Church between those who prioritize doctrinal orthodoxy and those who emphasize social justice and pastoral work. Pope Francis's approach to internal church disputes continued in his reforms of important institutions, including the influential John Paul II Institute. In 2017, Pope Francis made a significant decision to reshape the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family, which was established by Pope John Paul II in 1981 as a center for traditional Catholic teaching on marriage and sexual ethics. Francis issued a motu proprio called Summa Familiae Cura, effectively re-establishing the institute under a new name and broader mission focused on interdisciplinary studies. This reform was part of Pope Francis's implementation of the 2014-2015 Synods on the Family and his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, aiming to develop a more pastoral approach to family-related issues. The controversy escalated in July 2019 when the Institute's new statutes were implemented, leading to the dismissal of several longtime faculty members associated with more traditional approaches to moral theology, including Monsignor Leo Molina and Father Jose Noriega. These dismissals sparked strong reactions from students, alumni, and conservative Catholics worldwide. Over 200 scholars signed a letter expressing concern about the direction of the reform. Critics argued that these changes undermined the legacy of John Paul II and marginalized those who defend traditional Catholic teaching on sexuality and marriage. Supporters countered that the changes were necessary to make the Institute more relevant to the contemporary challenges faced by families and to integrate insights from the social sciences alongside theological reflection. Francis's reform of the John Paul II Institute foreshadowed greater tensions with the progressive synodal path he charted. The German Catholic Church's synodal path, a reform process launched in December 2019, emerged from a damning 2018 report on clerical sexual abuse, which identified structural issues within the Church as factors contributing to the abuse and its cover-up. Led by Cardinal Reinhard Marx, the German bishops argued that significant reforms were needed to address these systemic issues and restore the Church's credibility in Germany. Francis openly criticized the German Church's approach, expressing concerns that it threatened the unity of the Church and overstepped the appropriate boundaries of a national bishops' conference. Tensions escalated when the German Synod passed resolutions calling for significant changes that appeared to challenge the established discipline and doctrine of the Church, including proposals to bless same-sex couples, greater lay participation in the selection of bishops, increased roles for women in ministry, and reconsideration of the mandatory celibacy of priests. In January 2023, the Vatican issued a statement declaring that the German Synodal Council had no ecclesiastical validity and prohibited German bishops from participating in it. Although the German bishops affirmed their communion with Rome, the majority of them continued to pursue their reform plans, creating an unusual deadlock between a pope often seen as progressive and a national church pushing for even more profound reforms. This difference highlighted the contradictions in the approach between the pope and the German church, a unique situation in the modern Catholic Church. Similar tensions arose during Pope Francis's groundbreaking visit to the UAE in February 2019, when he and Grand Imam Ahmed Al-Tayeb signed the document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. However, a statement in this document sparked significant theological controversy. The passage affirmed that the diversity of religions is the will of God, seemingly implying that God actually desires the existence of different religions. This statement sparked debates on religious pluralism within the Catholic community, with some arguing that it contradicts the Church's traditional teachings. This statement left many Catholic theologians and religious leaders confused, including Bishop Athanasius Schneider, who argued that it contradicted the Church's doctrine of Christ as the sole mediator of salvation. Critics pointed out that while religious diversity might be permitted by God in the sense that he allows human freedom, traditional Catholic doctrine holds that God desires all people to come to the knowledge of Christ and his Church. The controversy intensified when Bishop Schneider reported that in a private meeting, Pope Francis clarified that he intended the phrase to refer to God's permissive will rather than his active will. Supporters of the document argue that it should be understood in its diplomatic and pastoral context. They claim the primary goal of the document was to combat religious extremism and violence, rather than to address complex theological issues. Moving on to other financial controversies, the Vatican Bank has raised significant issues. The Institute for the Works of Religion, IOR, commonly known as the Vatican Bank, has long been controversial due to allegations of money laundering, lack of transparency, and financial scandals. In June 2013, Pope Francis authorized an evaluation of the Vatican Bank, later establishing the Secretariat for the Economy in 2014, headed by Cardinal George Pell. One notable case involved Monsignor Nunzio Scarano, a senior accountant who was arrested in June 2013 for corruption and attempting to smuggle money, highlighting the urgent need for reform. Under Francis's leadership, the Vatican Bank underwent significant reforms, closing hundreds of accounts that did not meet transparency criteria and strengthening anti-money laundering procedures. The most significant financial scandal during Pope Francis's papacy emerged in 2019, with revelations about a real estate deal in London that led to substantial financial losses amid corruption allegations. In response, Francis stripped the financial assets of the Secretariat of State, centralizing control over finances. Critics argue that despite these efforts, Francis's approach to financial reform remains inconsistent, pointing to scandals and reforms that have either been reversed or diluted. Next, a controversial quote shook the world. In March 2018, an interview between Pope Francis and Italian journalist Eugenio Scalfari sparked an international media storm when Scalfari reported that the Pope told him, "There is no hell, there is the disappearance of sinful souls." The alleged statement, which represented a significant departure from Catholic doctrine, prompted an immediate response from the Vatican, which dismissed Scalfari's account as a reconstruction rather than an accurate transcript. The controversy was amplified by several factors. First, Scalfari was known for his unorthodox interview methods. He did not record conversations or take notes during interviews. Instead, he would reconstruct them from memory. Second, the timing was particularly sensitive, as the alleged statement was published during Holy Week. This incident reflected a recurring pattern in Pope Francis's papacy. His preference for informal, off-the-record conversations with journalists sometimes led to misunderstandings or misrepresentations of his views. While this approach allowed Francis to connect with a broader audience, it also created opportunities for confusion about the Church's teachings. The controversy raised questions about Francis's judgment in continuing to give interviews to Scalfari, despite previous problematic reports. This was not the first time Scalfari attributed controversial theological statements to Francis. He had previously claimed that the Pope denied the physical resurrection of Jesus. From clerical sexual abuse to LGBTQ+ issues, from advocating for environmental protection to the finances of the Vatican, Pope Francis has proven to be neither the revolutionary some progressives hoped for, nor the traditionalist some conservatives desired. And that's the full list of 20 secret documents that the Vatican once tried to erase related to Pope Francis. Hard to believe, right? These revelations not only shake the foundation but also raise many questions about what's really happening behind the closed doors of the Holy See. What do you think about these secrets? Feel free to leave a comment below to share your thoughts. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to support me and ensure you don't miss the next mystery exploration. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.